This is Wynette Tasker. I'm the Children and Youth Program Coordinator here at Redwind, and I'm helping facilitate today. So real quick, if you look under the materials box, we have a webinar sign-in sheet. So if there's more than one of you at your office space, if you could download that and then fill it in with all of your names and then send it back to us either by email or fax, whatever works best for you, that would be great. And we also have the PowerPoint on PDF that you can download. So for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with Redwind, we are a national tribal technical assistance provider working with the Office on Violence Against Women. Redwind's vision is to strengthen tribal programs and Native organizations' ability to develop and enhance local responses to address and prevent domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. In this effort, Redwind is committed to building the leadership of Indigenous women, defining and guiding its work from traditions and values that carry the strength and essence of Native women while recognizing that we must work across our community to bring everyone back into the circle of life. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. If you've missed any of our past webinars, we do archive them on our website, which is red-wind.net, and I'll type it into the chat box too. Today's webinar is on economic advocacy to strengthen survivors' long-term sustainability. It'll review implementing economic advocacy, helping tenants understand what resources are available, and learning how to access resources to be successful. Our presenter today is Vicki Ibanez, who is Redwind's Executive Director, and I'll let her tell you a little bit more about herself, and I'll pass it over to her. Thanks, Vicki.
Thanks, Wynette. Hi, everybody. So this is Vicki Ibanez. I work at Redwind Consulting, and I'm Navajo and Hickory Apache. And I have been working on transitional housing for a lot of years. I've had the good fortune to be able to work in 2 different transitional housing programs myself, one of them where I developed the programming in it, and then the second one where I developed the entire program itself, the whole administrative structure, everything that went into that second one. And we're fortunate through our work at Redwind to have a project that's focused on tribal technical assistance for transitional housing programs. And so I think that's enough about me. And I just want to say that in this webinar, I want to really lay some foundation for thinking about economic advocacy. As I've worked with tribes in their response to transitional housing, one of the things that I see is that the economic side of needs for victims tend not to be focused on very intentionally or very strongly. Not to say that that's the case for all programs, but there's several that I've come across that that's the case. And so it kind of motivates me to think about bringing this forward to everybody to think in more depth about what does economic advocacy mean and how do we do it. When we think about what economic advocacy is, I wanted to start by laying some foundational thinking for it. And so one of the things that comes to my mind is thinking around justice. And justice means different things to different people. And the big thing that I think is really important is that as we think about who we're working with, our client population, the women that we're working with, and some of you may also be working with men, are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault or dating violence and/or stalking. And as a result of what's happened to them, their lives have been disrupted either by a single incident or a series of things that have happened over time, which has put them in a position where they're in a more vulnerable state. So as we think about justice, for me, that not only is it holding the offender accountable, but working in a way to create opportunity and an environment for those that we serve to really engage in a way of redefining their lives in a way that makes sense for them. So as I think about that, and as we're working with victims and survivors around justice for themselves, I also hear from different people about, well, they just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, and we can't be, doing too much for them because we're building a dependent relationship. And I really wanted to just point out that when we think about when we're creating justice, and I love this particular slide because it really kind of breaks down the difference between justice and charity. And so when we think about justice, we're really talking about the foundation that gives us the ability to be charitable to others. And so when I think about that, if I am in the very basics of needs and survival, I often have extremely limited or no ability to give to others. And so we want to create an opportunity so that people have the ability to give to others. And not that we expect people to give, but for us as Native people, as tribal people, oftentimes, we come from a way that we care for one another. We keep everybody, we keep and care for everybody. And so as we think about our programs, that we're in a position to make a difference in terms of changing the conditions of what's going on in somebody's life, to bring them to a place where they can move from just worrying about themselves to become more focused on caring about others and caring about the community as a whole. So I wanted to point out these statistics about poverty, income and poverty. And when we think about that, many of you, I'm sure, are aware that in our own tribal communities that we have some of the highest rates of poverty than anywhere in the nation. When we look at median household income at $37,000 roughly, compared to the nation as a whole with an average of $53,000, we've got a real distinctive difference there of roughly about $15,000 below the national average. And then when we think about the percentages, we have some of the highest rates of poverty. So then as we add in and factor in the impacts of domestic violence and sexual assault, that impacts us and our ability to care for ourselves. And here's some of that data in a bar chart. I just thought that might be interesting for you to see it. And one of the things, and so when I look at this chart, I question it a little bit because I know some of our tribes, we have rates as high as 40 and 60 and even higher percent of our population in poverty, which makes it challenging for us as we're looking at how we develop our responses and work with victims to create change for themselves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about economic abuse. And so when we think about economic abuse, we know that that's one of the tactics that can be used against domestic violence victims. And I've seen that with survivors that I've worked with, where they've had limited access to the economic resources and they've been used as tools to control a person's behavior and way of living, and using that form as power and control against them. And then when we think about the impact of trauma, that trauma actually can play out and create higher levels of hardship, economic hardship, for victims as they're trying to recover from that trauma, either the trauma of repeated instances of physical and emotional abuse or sexual abuse. May even be one incident of sexual abuse, but the impact of that trauma can create a situation to where it becomes difficult to focus at your job, difficult to follow through on the details it takes to stay in school, and they may even have to leave their existing housing and maybe move into other housing, which might mean additional economic challenges. And when we think about the limited resources that our tribes have and our Native people have, that it opens up and helps us to see how we've got such an incredible challenge for us as we're working with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence that are in our transitional housing programs. So it raises the question, what are we going to do? Because as we think about the economic advocacy aspect of this work, for us, the staff within our transitional housing program, it requires that we get engaged and we one, have the knowledge and understanding of what economic abuse and its impact is, and then also how to respond in a way that's going to make a difference for those that we work with. Because we do have a small window of opportunity to work with victims in our transitional housing program. And, so when we think about that, we've got that 6 months to up to 24 months period of time that can actually make a significant difference in the direction a person is going. And it takes some time and effort and some intentional thought on our part. So as we think about victims coming into our program and where they're coming from, I think it's important we think about where they are in terms of looking at and thinking about their needs. Most of the time when we're working with someone in transitional housing, we have the opportunity to be working with somebody as they get a little bit of distance from the actual crisis incident that the violence brought about. And so the fact that we have that minimum of 6 months up to a maximum of 24 months allows us to help the household move from the basics of worrying about where they're going to get food, where they're going to sleep, some of the basic needs, and stabilize their situation in a way that they're feeling more safe. So we've moved through that second level of safety, where we're thinking about the security of ourselves, our well-being. And so as we start to move and start to think about kind of the long-term picture, we're looking at that in part as a part of the safety as we think of employment and resources, thinking about the needs of our family as a whole. We start to see our future and starting to care about friendships, family, relationships. We're starting to gain more confidence and moving towards self-actualization. So we have that period of time to make that difference. And as I said, it's intentional on our part. So in that, for us as staff, I think one of the critical things for us is that we need to understand the different immediate resources, the economic resources that are available to victims in our community. So is she on public assistance? Is she receiving TANF? What are the requirements in TANF? How much time is she going to have on that? And where is she in that time span? And is it possible to get a waiver for more time? And so because TANF is a time-limited public assistance program, households, it's a great resource for the households to help people through immediate crisis. And, we're often on the clock of a 5-year time span. And so the person we may be working with may have already been in that program for 2 years, 4 years, or even closing in on the end of their timeline. And so it really puts us as advocates in a position of having to understand how that system works so that we can be able to work effectively with this individual. Because one, they can't pay their rent if they don't have income coming in, and that public assistance is one of the primary resources as people are dealing with some of the trauma and may not be adequately ready to step into employment or into an education program. So what's important is for advocates to learn about the public assistance programs available to the tribe. I would encourage advocates to go and meet with the public assistance workers, the TANF workers, to learn about some of the regulations, the rules, the application process, and under what conditions that they can get a waiver and what those timelines look like. I would also encourage advocates to look into SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and to also do the same type of thing, is to learn about the resources, the rules, the regulations, the process it takes for people to get assistance with the SNAP program, to be able to get people in a position of getting food on their table. And I know that there's also an emergency aspect in it where they can move it through quickly if there's an emergency situation on, so that's not just your basic process for the application. And so also with that, in terms of kind of a public assistance type resource, another one that I want to bring up is the Social Security Disability Assistance, the SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. And that process is longer, but still necessary. And one of the things that I know is for a victim who may have chronic alcoholism and has been trying to address their alcoholism but can't quite get a handle on it. And oftentimes that's going to be an impact of the violence, where they may have had repeated incidents of violence, and as a result of that, one of their coping skills in trying to manage that trauma is going to be using alcohol or drugs. And if they can't get a handle on that and they have repeated attempts at that, they may be eligible for SSDI. And it's one of those resources that can buy them a few more years while they try to work through some things and try to continue to look at trying to get sober and focus on their sobriety to get that stable before they move into another phase of their life. It's also a great resource if you've got someone who's struggling with mental health issues. And what I do know about the Social Security Disability Insurance Program is that people have different experiences with it. Some people say it takes a few years to get on, and I personally have helped a few people where it's taken a few years, and I've also helped a few people where it's taken a few months. And so it's a matter of being able to understand the process, understand the applications and the procedures that will go, that'll happen over the period of time that people are trying to secure that resource. So then the other part of it, when I think about resources, I think about getting people ready for a job, and it needs to be more future looking, beyond how do we just quick get a job to deal with today, but how do we start to think about how to move in the direction we want to go. So when I think I think about that as an advocate, then I'm going to want to have an understanding of the education resources that we have within our tribal community, and that may also be available outside of the tribe, depending on what our tribe has available. And so that's going to range from adult education and working on a GED to complete high school. If you've got an adolescent that you're working with, maybe they're emancipated, maybe you can help them finish high school instead of going the route of a GED. But they may need some supports in trying to figure some of that stuff out. And then also being able to look at, so if people are in a place of maybe taking a few steps further into education, being able to understand what type of programs are available and what the process is to help people get set up with college. In one story that I want to tell you about a small group of women that I was working with when I was doing direct service, I had 4 women that were they were in our program, and they were at a point where they were starting to think about life beyond high school. And I said, well, let's just go to the college. And so we went to the college, a 2-year college, and I had set up an appointment for us to get a tour of the campus, and I set up an opportunity for us to have, I think it was 3 hours of the financial, I can't remember her title, but she was like the advisor on financial assistance. And then we had a student advisor also that we had a chunk of time that we had available. And so we didn't have one appointment for each person. We just had these chunks of time. And so we did the tour, and then I would have conversations with the women, and then one woman would go in and meet with the student advisor, another one would go meet with financial assistance, and in between I was able to talk with the other women. And so after that meeting, each of those 4 women decided to go ahead and make the application to start college, and they had each of them had different choices of the path they wanted to go, with 3 out of the 4 wanting to go into a certificate program that they could complete in a year. So the first day of school, we were walking out to my car. I was going to drive them to school that day. And we were walking to my car, and they were dreaming, and they were talking about how they can't wait until they get to, they were looking like a few years ahead. They couldn't wait until they could actually be a college student. And I stopped, and I looked at them, and I said, so where are we going today? We're going up to the college. And I said, well, how many of you are enrolled? And they all said, well, yeah, me, And I said, so doesn't that make you a college student? And they were just so excited, because it was like, oh my gosh, I actually am a college student. And the reason I tell you that story is that part of it is about walking with them in this journey. So having enough knowledge to walk with them in this journey, and then as a part of that, being able to help mirror back where they're at, because sometimes they aren't able to see some of the successes of where they're going and what they're doing in their lives. And that story, I think, it's just such a great example of how they couldn't see this enormous, wonderful, powerful step they were making in their lives, and that they were able to really fully appreciate this major milestone that they were stepping into at that point. So when I think about colleges, that
Hi there. We apologize for the audio mishap. We are trying to reconnect our presenter, so please just hang on tight and we'll get her connected as soon as possible. Thank you.
resources, and then they may make a referral to our program, and we just keep this open communication. So as I'm helping a woman in my program get situated, then I have a relationship, and I can say, well, you call so-and-so, so-and-so, set up an appointment with her, or let's just go do that together. So then the other side of this is also the job and the job readiness, as well as the job search and getting prepared for work, or those that are already working but need some supports to help them maintain, stabilize themselves in their working, and maybe think about, so then what next? Is this the job you want to be doing for the next 5-10 years of your life, or is there somewhere else you should be going? So for me is that I also want to know, what are your jobs programs that the tribe has available and the resources, and sometimes they're connected to the college and the academic resources in the community. So think about that, and again, go knock on those doors, go learn what those programs have to offer, so that you can make really good, effective connections, so that woman is not hitting dead ends as you send them out. And I'm a firm believer that, my experience with advocacy was that we went with women a lot. And so when I think about the trauma of domestic violence and sexual assault, stalking, dating violence, when we think about the trauma of all of that, that sometimes that becomes a barrier to someone wanting to take those steps forward. And so when we actually walk with them on that journey, that we can help them gain some confidence in the process. I'm just pausing here for a second because my internet connection dropped. So I'm asking, yeah, I can't sign in. So actually, Wynette, so at my request, can you change the slide for me?
Yes.
Thank you. So I'm a firm believer that it's helpful that we walk, and that piece for me is not about creating like a codependent relationship and they get so dependent on us. It really is about being able to walk with her on her journey as she gets more solid on her feet. And my experience over the years has been that as I walk with her, she will start to walk away from me. Not like walk away from me like she doesn't want to work with me, but walk away from me in a way that she's so solid on her feet she doesn't need me anymore. And it becomes kind of a balancing act for me to look at and figure out how much I want to or should get involved with this household, with this woman as a part of the steps that she's taking. Can you change the slide? And I can't see the slide, so I'm going to assume it's changed. It's economic advocacy. So when we think about economic advocacy, that there's this focus on being strength-based, that in that we want to focus in a way the person that we're working with it. So, I want to make sure that I'm asking questions and learning from that particular survivor about what her situation is, where she might be going in her life, and then offer some thoughts and ideas. And then from that, she's going to say, I think I can do that, you know. And one of the things for me is about, I like to come from a place of, if it's a whole new thing from them, let's just go learn together, to where I would go with them and help them learn. Like the example of the 4 women at the college, we went and learned together. And sometimes it's nice. So if you've got a few women in your program, take 2 or 3 at a time. So they're learning at the same time. They're kind of exploring it together, or do it one by one. Just another little story. My sister, her husband passed away 4 years ago, and at that particular time in her life, she was having to make huge decisions about everything all over again. And so I said, you know, maybe not think about this in terms of like the long term, let's get a degree, but let's go and explore and see what they have available at the college, and let's just do a tour. And we went and did a tour, and we spent about 3 hours at the college, and by the time we left, she was registered for school and started school on Monday. And I love that. I think that was a great outcome. And she started off with classes that felt interesting to her. And now this semester, she's graduating with a major and has just stayed with it. So she stepped her toes in, and then started to see the possibilities and stepped in like her full feet, and then went further until she's all the way in now. And so when I think about it in terms of being client-centered, that we're going to follow their cues. If they aren't ready to think about a degree program, then let's think about maybe taking a few classes just to get the experience, or maybe even stepping back. Let's just go see what they have to offer and see if there's anything that might be interesting, and taking that approach. And I think that as we think about economic advocacy, we want to make sure that it's shaped by that individual, and that the collective voices of victims. So as I'm working with one victim, I have others that I've worked with in the past, and they're going to give me some guidance on what's going to make sense. And it's not necessarily they're going to say, well, Vicki, you need to do this way next time. It's going to be that I'm listening and paying attention to what worked for them, what was helpful for them, what made a difference for them. And we want to do it in a way that's culturally appropriate. So as I think about that, if you don't have a tribal college and you're thinking about, well, maybe there's the community college next, in the neighboring town, consider how, check it out first by yourself, and consider how it's going to work for the person you work with. That I know from my experiences that there are going to be some neighboring towns that it's going to be just fine and wonderfully supportive for a native person, and in another one, a native person is going to be challenged because of community and institutional racism that might be playing out. So we want to make sure that we don't set people up in a way that's going to be a negative environment for them. And if that's something that needs to be used as a resource, then we want to figure out how we can support that individual to move through the different kind of barriers that might be coming out or playing out for them. And then when we think about being holistic and dynamic, that we really need to balance the reality of all the needs. So this particular person in our program, they're dealing with the trauma from the violence. They may have children. They may have health issues going on, or maybe dealing with substance use. So their ability to make those next steps are going to be affected by how they're managing all these other issues going on in their lives. So, and I don't think we have to just say, okay, well, we'll just only focus on this one part. Let's work on healing from the trauma, and then we'll go do this other piece. They can all happen simultaneously, but it means that we need to make sure that we don't push too hard too fast, but recognize that, we need the support and offer some guidance along the ways as people are trying to maneuver that. And so one of the things, as an example, is thinking about one woman I worked with, and she was newly sober, and she was terrified of drinking again. And she was a single woman. She didn't have any children living with her, so income was a struggle because TANF wasn't an option for her. And so having to get a job and trying to figure out how to manage that while she's trying to do all kinds of AA meetings and different kind of spiritual pieces to help stabilize her sobriety. And so I would ask her questions of, do you think that if you look at this job, that if they hired you, that you can manage these other pieces? And I would ask her the questions. I wouldn't tell her, don't do it, or yes, you better take it. I would ask her the questions. How do you think that's all going to work together for you? And get her to think about it so she could figure out what's going to make the best options, the best decisions for herself. And I don't want to be responsible for the decisions in this woman's life. And so it's important that we offer information. We can offer some stories, like, I know it's happened this way, and I know it's happened that way, and here's some stories to highlight that, and and what's going to make sense for you. Ask her the questions. How is that going to work if you sign up and you're working on your GED and you sign up and you're going to go 5 days a week? Is that going to fit in terms of managing 3 children and your sobriety? So that she's thinking about it. And she may be in a place where that fits, and another person may not be in a place where that fits. One of the other pieces that I think is really, really critical when we think about economic advocacy is that multidisciplinary and collaborative aspect of it. That I cannot provide economic advocacy to a survivor in a comprehensive way unless I have built the connections and the relationships with those that are providing those services. So an advocate in your transitional housing program cannot be expected to do the job coaching, to do all of the different aspects of all of these different programs. But if you know the resources and you've got some connections with there, you can really enhance your capacity while you're also being able to make a difference in a person's life, help her to step into areas she might not have seen possible for herself. And the relationships between your program and these other programs and agencies is going to help make the experience more smooth for the survivor. Can you change the slide? So when we think about, for me, when I think about the key to economic advocacy is about being patient, engaged, persistent, and supportive. And so all of those for me is in part, we are the cheerleaders. So when I talked about mirroring back, that we are the ones that are going to be able to help them to see themselves better. Because in the midst of trauma, they're really focused in a real narrow way. And, I think of that whole story that you hear about, you can't see the forest for the trees. And so if you're so focused, your vision has gotten so narrow from the trauma, all you can see is this tree in front of you. Maybe you can see the details of the bark and where the branches come out from the base of the tree, that kind of stuff. But what you're missing is that there's many, many trees, that there's an entire forest out there, and there's hills, and there's a river, and, and the clouds, and, there's so much more to see and to experience. And so as an economic advocate, so we're going to help her to move from seeing only the tree to being able to see the larger landscape in front of her. So that's part of the cheerleader piece, about helping her to see herself, to see her possibilities. And in that, we're going to have to be really patient. I know for myself, like I can be, I can be kind of a workaholic. People that know me know that I'm a really hard worker. And so I may want to put my expectations on someone else, and that's not going to be helpful for anybody at all. So it's important for us to realize that everybody has a different timeline, a different capacity, a different way of moving. And so it means we're going to have to be patient as people move at their own pace and not our pace. And we have to be engaged. And so when I say engaged, that's what I was saying before about take a woman with you or a couple women with you to the college to learn about it. Go and learn about public assistance and the rules and the waivers and how all those pieces work. Go to the Social Security office and learn about the SSDI process so that you have a better understanding of it. And then engaged is walk with this woman on her journey. Don't just hand her a note with a referral. Literally walk with her and help her move forward. We have this short window of opportunity, and while it may feel like a long time, 6 months to 24 months, compared to the crisis response, which is often maybe a 1 or 2 or 3 point contact, or maybe just for a few months, it really isn't. When we think about making significant life changes, it takes a long period of time. So being engaged is going to help them get on solid footing so that when our program time starts to end itself, that they have enough solid footing and momentum that they're going to keep going without us. And then that connects to the persistence. So the piece for me is about, I believe that being persistent is about helping people to see themselves, but reminding them of who they are, of their possibilities. And, if they aren't ready to go look at a college now or go to a meeting now and go take care of this kind of this other piece, I want to be persistent so that they know that I'm there, I care, and I can see them. And that when they tell me no one time, that I just don't go away and say, okay, well, she doesn't want to do anything. That I'm persistent enough to stay with her to help her to start seeing herself, and that she can do this. She's real capable of it. And we're talking about somebody who's lived with violence, whether it's one incident of a sexual assault who's traumatized and has all kinds of triggers going on, or someone who has been living with domestic violence for 2 years to 15 years, and they have lost sight of themselves. So that persistence is about helping to remind them over and over and over again until they believe themselves. And then we do that in a supportive, caring, loving way. And I think it's, even like when I'm talking to somebody and telling them, your alcoholism is messing up everything in your life, I do that with the most love and respect. Maybe even if they don't show up for meetings that I have set up and I have to redo all of the work, I let them know that we need to follow through next time, and how important it is so that we can have a good result from our efforts. And I do that with the most love and respect. And so it's important that I am supportive of them and recognize the limits of where they're at now. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share some resources because there's a lot. When we think about economic advocacy, there is a lot. So I've talked a lot about how to work with services, but we also, in the economic advocacy, people can get a job or they can get public assistance. And if they can't manage whatever resources they have, they're going to be undermined. And so it's important that they have an ability to really look at and figure out ways to improve their view of their economic situation. So one of the resources, the Allstate Foundation, Click to Empower, they have a resource for financial literacy. So this particular tool is a really great resource in terms of helping a household as you're working with a family or individual to think about how to manage the economic resources that they have. And so if they're living on $500 a month, something that small, sometimes people say, well, I have nothing to budget. But you really do have something to budget, and then you want to help them look and see and understand that. And then if you can't see beyond this immediate economic crisis with your extremely limited resources, it'll be hard to get out of that. So you'll always be struggling with being on the edge of eviction, edge of utilities being shut off, all of that. And I think it's critical as we're working with victims to think about, so what are the emergency resources that they might have to pull in to help manage? So for example, I'll share a personal story of my own. When I left my ex-husband, I became homeless for a short period of time, and then I got into housing, and I had to pay full utilities as a part of my rent, as well as, I had groceries to buy, I had kids' tennis shoes to buy, I had 2 children, and when I looked at my budget, there was not enough to cover all of it, clearly not enough. And so I had to figure out how to manage the other charitable type resources, such as emergency assistance and food shelf, to be able to stretch the budget. And once a winter, I had to rely on a shut-off notice to be able to cover 2 months of my utility bill so that I could make it, as well as I had to depend on using the food shelf once every 3 months to be able to stretch the limited resources I had for food for our household. And by doing that, I was able to put the tennis shoes on my children's feet. I was able to make sure we had toilet paper in the house. We didn't have much more than that, but we were able to make it. So there's a lot of ways to think about the economic resources, and I'd encourage you to look into this this resource here from the Allstate Foundation. There's other great resources in here. My Money, the Basic Financial Education also. And then the National Network to End Domestic Violence has some good information on financial tips for victims and survivors, as well as like the Consumer Rights for Domestic Violence Victims and Wise Up, which is another curriculum. So all of these, I checked the links before I put them on this slide, so they were all good as of like a month ago. So I'd encourage you to check them out and look at what other resources are helpful. As I've worked with women over the years, I've found that there are times I've helped them think about their finances, think about their budgets, think about how to manage not just the money end of it, but also the energy end of it. So how do you manage 3 kids, going to school for a certificate and working on your sobriety? That's all energy, and all 3 of them are very, very important and need attention. So I really encourage advocates to think about how to put together a real comprehensive response to economic advocacy as you think about working with victims and survivors. Wynette, can you change the slide? And then this last slide is our contact information. I'm going to open it up for questions here in just a minute, but I do want to say that any of you, if you've got any questions specific about people you're working with or your program or anything, Redwind provides technical assistance for the Tribal Transitional Housing Program, so I encourage you to reach out. That's my personal email there. So you can email me. That's better than calling me because a lot of times I'm not by my phone, but I can respond to an email. And if we want to talk, then we can set up a time to do that. So I just want to stop here and see if there are any questions from anybody. We can take a few questions before we wrap up.
So feel free to go ahead and type questions into the chat box, everyone.
And while you're thinking of questions, which I know a few of you have some, I would guess anyway, I would just want to say that that with our technical assistance that we have, that we also can do a few on-sites. One of the things that we're doing this year, which is new through our transitional housing technical assistance, is that we're actually doing fairly comprehensive program reviews. And sometimes people think like, oh, a program review, that sounds a little scary, like, you know, maybe we don't want to do something comprehensive like that. But I've actually had multiple programs making a request for that because what we're doing with it is to be able to look at all of what you're offering and thinking about what else can you do or how might you change some of that to enhance your program to make it more of what you envision it to be. And so we can do that as an on-site. It's a part of the process of our transitional housing TA, so then you would reach out to me, let me know you're interested in it. We would have a conversation about what you would like to have happen on an on-site, and then I submit it to OVW for approval, which then allows Redwind to use our TA funds to cover my expenses to come out and do that work with you. So I just wanted to share that piece with you. So do we have any questions?
Vicki, we have a comment and a question from Rita. She said, I'm new to my position, but I really like how you said that we're cheerleaders because that's how I see myself. I enjoyed the webinar and I look forward to going out and learning what other programs have to offer. Is there a specific training or conference regarding transitional housing?
Actually, Rita, well, congratulations on being a transitional housing advocate, because I actually think it's one of the best options for making a difference in people's lives. So we have a national conference that we are in the process of planning right now. We don't have dates yet, but we're looking at September. And all of the tribal grantees will receive a notice from us when it's coming available. And if you haven't already, I don't know if you are a primary contact on your grant, but if you're not, you can go to Redwind's website, and we have a thing called In the Wind e-news, and you can sign up on there. So anytime we send out any announcements, you can also get information from that about the conference, and it's going to be on our website. One more thing I want to add about that, well, not specifically about that, is we are also, and this is new to this year, is we are developing peer visits. So what that is, we are working with 3 different programs that work within tribal communities, or tribes, and or our Native-specific programming that have some aspect that is really something pretty darn good that we want to highlight. And we have one peer visit coming up in March. I don't happen to have that paperwork with me handy, but we're getting ready to send an email blast on that out next week. And it's going to have small attendance. So the one happening in March is with American Indian Community Housing Organization. They're an urban Indian program, and they do an excellent job around working with substance abuse and mental health issues. And then they also do a really good job in terms of looking at options for victims. And so that's going to be the focus of that peer visit. And then the other one peer visit that we're that's in the works right now, so I won't name that program just because we don't have anything approved yet, is going to focus on how to provide culturally specific programming that really brings in culture and tradition into the way you do your work. And then the third peer visit that we're also working on is focusing on the overarching philosophy around how we do our work and guiding policies in terms of carrying that forward. And so the peer visits are designed for a small number of people. So we're capping it at 8 people that get to go. It's a one-day visit. I'll be on location at that site. The local site will host us. We'll do a tour, and then we'll have some guided conversations around the specific topics. So I'm really excited about those peer visits, and we're doing 3 this year, and then I expect we'll probably start doing a couple on a regular basis each year. That was a long answer, Rita. Other questions or comments, Wynette?
Nothing else. Nope.
Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you everyone so much for joining us. As Vicki explained, we have a variety of different technical assistance activities that we can help you out with. We're really here to help you do your jobs better and in a more comprehensive and culturally appropriate way. So let us know what your needs are so we can help you on an individual basis. Our webinar today will be archived on our website in a couple of weeks. And again, if you missed any of the other webinars, you can go to our website to see those archived. Our next webinar is on February 9th, and that one is on LGBTIQ victims, their unique needs and transitional housing program responsiveness. So we hope to see you there. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Bye.